have been exploring God's presence with us as Emmanuel, God with us. We've talked about the different ways that Christ is present, and especially throughout our camps this week and in Hardison, we've talked about different places where we experience God being with us. And tonight we're going to focus on what it is for Emmanuel, God to be with us at home. Now I want you to think about what your picture of an ideal home is. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I would like to play with Legos all the time, and I would build my perfect home. It always had a food cycle like the Jetsons, where you could just have whatever food you wanted to eat immediately. But you think about the different elements that you incorporate into your design. And I remember when John and I bought our first house, and I used to watch all these design shows, and I'd go buy fancy paint colors and paint the walls. And especially as we were preparing for our first child, I spent so much time working on that nursery, picking out the right shade of purple for the walls, getting custom-made blinds to go with those purple walls. By the time Asher came along, we just stuck a crib in my office and didn't even paint for him. But you think about how you want to create a perfect place. What is it that makes a place a home? And what's the difference between a house and a home? We come to that as we look at this gospel lesson because we know this story. We know it backward and forward. But we get to this point in the story where we know that Mary has been engaged to Joseph. And as often happens with government proclamations, they don't always come at times that are, let's say, convenient for people that are citizens. Amen? Sometimes you have to do the taxes even when you've got other things on your agenda. And as Mary and Joseph have to take this long journey, she is with child. And we can think about how uncomfortable that is a way to travel. But think even more about this young girl being taken from everything that she knows and is familiar with and is comfortable with. And she's come to this city where she's going to have a child. It's not written in this gospel, but we know it from the accounts in other places that as it was time for her to be born, there was no place for them. And Mary and Joseph had to make do with the accommodations that were available. And that was to be in the stable. And at the time Jesus was born, Mary wasn't surrounded by her mother, or maybe even a midwife that she had gone to monthly appointments with. She wasn't accompanied by the special list of people that she got to write out would be in the delivery room with her. She's just there with this guy, Joseph, who she barely knows, really. You think about it. I mean, how well do you know the person that you're married to at the very beginning of the relationship? They haven't even really spent much time living together. And here she is away from everything that she knows, and it's time for this child to be born. And we think about how different an experience that was, because earlier in the gospel, we hear about John the Baptist's arrival, and how when he was born, Elizabeth, his mother, and Zechariah, their whole house was filled with family and friends and people to welcome this baby that had been awaited for so long, the prophet that was going to come before the Messiah. But here, Mary and Joseph have a very different experience. What is it that makes Emmanuel, God with us, even more poignant in this moment? It's the fact that Christ wasn't born into that perfect scenario. Christ wasn't born into that perfect birth plan. And he wasn't even going to be able to return home immediately from the hospital. His parents were at risk, and they had to take the baby into safety. And so they were going to be sojourners. They were going to be refugees for the beginning of this Christ child's life. So what does it mean for Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, to be born into those kinds of circumstances? Not the ones that are perfect, but the ones that need the greatest presence of God. The ones that need to experience the touch of God in a very incarnational, personal way. When the Word is made flesh and comes to dwell among us, it's not into something that you would see on the cover of House Beautiful. It is into a life that needs the presence of God. We look at that and we think about what it means for us as we consider what a home is. When we're inviting God to be in our home, it's not necessarily the place that we create, but it's the way God lives into the places where we feel like we belong. And as we look at the beginning of a life, as we think about the Christ child being born in this manger, when you think about what a home is, I want you to fast forward to the end of your lifespan. And we never know the number of those days. We never know how many breaths we'll breathe here in this life. But it's funny that studies have shown when you feel like you have less time in this world, as you age, you begin to spend less time being concerned about experiences that you think will help you grow, and more about experiences where you feel like you will be connected to those that you love the most. And they've done this study over all kinds of different cultures and with different age groups, but time and time again it shows that when we feel like our time is slipping away from us, what matters more to us is those relationships that we have. That home is really the place where we feel belonging. And it was an interesting experience that a woman had many years ago. She was a teenager at the time, and while she was in college, her mother, her only remaining parent, had a stroke. And this particular woman was concerned with the type of care that her mother received in a nursing home, because she truly felt like there was not a sense of freedom that her mother had, that so much of what her mother loved to do was stripped away from her, that she didn't feel like she belonged in any of the places where they were trying to find her care. None of them felt like home to her. So this woman and her husband, who happened to be sociologists, they went about studying what it means to have a quality of life. And what they found was that sense of freedom, that sense of belonging. Even if you need others to care for you, you still need to have the ability to do things that matter, to be with people you care about. And she was the one who designed the very first assisted living facilities. And now lots of places call themselves assisted living now. Lots of things have that name slapped on it. But what mattered most as she was putting together this program was this idea that people being able to be surrounded with those that they loved, to be able to have decisions in their care and to choose what they wanted to do, whether they wanted to stay up all night and sleep all day, or whether they wanted to be able to have friends come over and have a party in their room. Those kinds of things mattered, because belonging and those relationships that we have are what create home. And when we wonder about where Christ is, Christ is always in those places where we need to feel belonging, where we need to feel that we're part of a community and that we feel like we're part of something that's bigger than us. That's what Christ, Emmanuel, God with us, invites us into. Places where we may feel like we need to be connected. That's why God brings us together. That's why community and worship as a group, as a body of gathered believers is so important, because that's where Emmanuel comes in, when we are connected to one another. And we find that here, this message that Jesus brings, even at the very beginning of his life, that's where a home can be. It's not necessarily what we've built for ourselves, but it's any place where we are gathered with those that matter to us, and where God is present in the midst of that. That home can be a stable with animals and a manger, just as well as home can be an apartment that you have at the end of your life. Home can be any of those places where we recognize the community and the compassion that Christ offers for all of us. So we think about where we want Jesus to reside. The answer should be everywhere where we travel, because that is where we will know belonging. That is where we will know God with us. And so as you think about your ideal home, may Christ be the center of it, wherever it is that you reside. Thanks be to God.